Certain kind of light will never shine on me. I want my life to be there with you, there with you.
We've had some ovations before for people, but few quite with the warmth that you just received there.
It's wonderful, but you know, there's so many familiar faces here that I think it's a setup.
For over 30 years, the truth about Andy Gibb's tragic death was buried under a mountain of rumors. Was it a drug overdose or just a heartbreaking accident? All these speculations festered because of the silence of the one man who knew the real story, his older brother, Barry Gibb. Now, at 78, the last of the Bee Gees is finally breaking that silence. And the story he's telling isn't about tabloids or conspiracies. It's a gut-wrenching confession about a final phone call, a big brother's guilt, and a devastating message of love that arrived just a little too late. One day in 1958, 12-year-old Barry Gibb was walking around and jingling with coins from his paper route rich, which is code for enough to feel like you could buy the moon if they'd let you. Now, Barry didn't squander this money on sweets or comic books. Instead, he slid into a dusty secondhand shop and spotted a beat-up acoustic guitar. Barry dumped every last penny on this scrappy guitar and brought it home and plopped it into the tiny hands of his 8-year-old baby brother, Andy. Half serious, half teasing, Barry said, "You've got piano fingers, perfect for the fast licks." Of course, Andy was over the moon, though they were still broke. They had a lot of fun in their little home. Andy didn't start off performing in front of massive stadiums or screaming crowds. His first real audience was a quiet little church hall packed with grandmas. He got up on that tiny stage and sang a song that 10 years later would become his signature hit, "I Just Wanna Be Your Everything." The emotion in his voice was so genuine that it actually brought a few of the older ladies to tears, which was kind of amazing. Now, Barry wasn't in the spotlight at all. He was off to the side, holding Andy's coat like a mix of proud big brother and personal bodyguard, mouthing all the words and quietly feeling this enormous swell of pride. Fast forward a bit to 1977, and the Bee Gees aren't just the boys from Manchester anymore. They're massive disco-era superstars, basically shaping the sound of the whole world. They're in Criteria Studios in Miami, working on tracks that would become timeless hits, and Andy's there too, not as a kid anymore, but as a young man with that same fire in his eyes, just soaking everything in. Between takes, Barry casually throws an arm around him and jokingly says, "One day, we'll write one for you," not knowing that one day was actually that very afternoon. Inspired and buzzing, they sat down together and wrote Shadow Dancing, a song that came out like pure lightning, everything falling perfectly into place. Suddenly, Andy went from being the little brother tagging along to having a #1 hit at 19, launching him into this whirlwind of fame, screaming fans, and global attention before he even really had time to process it.
For so long, you and me been finding each other for so long, and the feeling that I feel for you is more than...
By 1978, Andy Gibb had become exactly what everyone thought he could be, and then some. He was the golden boy of pop, living in a sprawling LA mansion with panoramic views of the city, a fridge that was always stocked with champagne, and that kind of spark in his eye that made it obvious he felt like the world belonged to him. Barry came to visit from Miami, and there they were on the balcony, clinking glasses as the sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. But even in that perfect moment, Barry couldn't help noticing a little crack in the armor, that subtle fragility that fame sometimes hides. He leaned over, clinked his glass against Andy's, and said quietly, almost to himself, "Just don't stand too close to the edge, kid." It was brotherly advice swallowed up by all the glitter and success, but it stuck. After that, their relationship shifted in ways that weren't always easy. The sunny, carefree days were replaced by late-night phone calls, sometimes at hours when Barry was barely conscious, the phone jarring him awake. On the other end was Andy, but he wasn't the confident kid from Manchester anymore. His voice sounded rougher, tired around the edges and just worried. "Bar," he'd ask, voice small and uncertain, "do you think my voice sounds okay? Is it still there?" And Barry knew it wasn't really about the singing. It was about Andy himself, about whether he was still okay under all that fame. In Miami, Barry would pace his marble floors, phone pressed to his ear, trying to make sense of the worry and fear bubbling up in his little brother. Most of the time, he responded the only way he knew how, with gruff, practical, tough love. "It's 2 a.m. Go to sleep, dummy," he'd mutter, hoping that if Andy just slept, somehow everything would fix itself. The anxiety wasn't just in the late-night phone calls. It followed Andy everywhere, especially backstage during the 1980 tour when he was opening for the Bee Gees. What should have been a dream, sharing the stage with his brothers, often felt like a nightmare. Before going on, he'd be backstage completely consumed by nerves, sometimes physically sick from the pressure of having to live up to the Gibb name and the enormous success he'd already had. Barry was always there, though, hovering like he had when they were kids, offering that same gentle shoulder rub their mum used to give when they'd scraped their knees, a little gesture meant to calm something far deeper than a bruise. Andy would pull himself together, walk out on stage, and most of the time he'd absolutely kill it, hitting the notes, charming the audience, radiating that magnetic star power. But as soon as the applause died down, he'd disappear. Barry would find him later, not in the dressing room celebrating, but curled up in some concrete stairwell like a kid lost in a big world, hiding from the very adoration he'd worked so hard to earn. Barry would sit down next to him, the echoes of the cheering crowd still bouncing off the walls, and quietly tell him something he wanted Andy to really believe. It's only noise. You're bigger than the noise. By 1983, Andy had what should have been a fresh start, a shot at real legitimacy on Broadway, playing the lead in Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. On paper, it looked like a triumph, a chance to prove himself in a completely new way. But in reality, it quickly turned into a public display of just how badly things were spiraling. He started missing shows, leaving his understudy to step in more and more often, and the whispers started turning into full-blown headlines. The tabloids, always hungry for drama, jumped on it with sensational covers and basically declared that Ann was struggling with DA. Barry couldn't just read that from a distance, and so he dropped everything and flew straight to New York. When he got to Andy's hotel suite, it was like stepping into a nightmare. Lampshades were knocked over, furniture dusted with a fine white powder Barry knew too well, and in the middle of it all was Andy, passed out on the floor, clutching a telephone like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. Barry didn't yell, didn't lecture. There was no point. He went into action. He started canceling Andy's entire schedule, dealing with furious calls from producers and agents, and then, with a care that was almost gentle given the chaos around them, he lifted his brother up like a rolled-up rug, carried him out of that suite, and got him back to Miami, away from the wreckage of a Broadway dream that had already gone off the rails. What came next were 6 weeks of what you could almost call enforced calm, a mix of daylight, routine, and quiet rebuilding. Their mornings started at dawn with intense, almost punishing games of tennis. Barry trying to sweat out the poison from Andy's system, both literally and figuratively. Meals were simple, nothing like the champagne and caviar of LA, usually burnt toast and coffee, and they talked endlessly. They dig up old stories from their childhood, resurrecting inside jokes, trying to remind themselves who they were before all the noise got too loud. For the first time in ages, Andy laughed again, not the hollow laugh of a performer, but real, deep belly laughs that seemed to shake the sadness out. Watching him, Barry allowed himself a tiny flicker of hope and thought, maybe we've actually cracked it. He might just be okay. But of course, it didn't last. By 1985, feeling buoyed by the recovery, Andy got a new record deal and put out a single, and the whole family held its breath, hoping this would be the comeback. It wasn't. The single flopped, barely making a dent in the charts, and the label, unsurprisingly, dropped him almost immediately, and the money, which had always seemed endless, suddenly vanished. Friends and advisors suggested rehab, a structured program to deal with his demons. But to Andy, rehab sounded like admitting defeat, like adulting in the worst possible way, and he wasn't ready for that. Things spiraled fast. Within 6 months, he was broke. And the late-night calls started again, but they weren't the same as before. Now they were collect calls, made from dusty, grimy gas station payphones, the operator's metallic voice opening the line to Andy's own thin, desperate voice asking just for a little help, just enough to get by.
The pop singer Andy Gibb died today. He was the younger brother of the 3 Gibbs who make up the Bee Gees.
The last chapter came in the early morning hours of March 9th, 1988. It was a little after 2 in London, where Andy was staying and trying once again to pull together a comeback. Barry was half asleep in Miami when the phone by his bed jolted him awake. It was Andy, but this time, his voice wasn't the frantic, slurred tone Barry had come to expect. It was different, soft, almost childlike. The same gentle voice Barry remembered from when they were kids in Manchester. "Barry," he said quietly, "my heart's doing weird things." Barry snapped fully awake and immediately started searching for flights, figuring out how quickly he could get to London. On the other end, Andy let out a little laugh, but it wasn't carefree. It was tired, almost resigned. "Nah, it's okay. I'm just tired. Really tired. Gonna sleep now." Barry's voice broke as he pleaded, "Don't go to sleep. I'll be there first thing in the morning. Just don't do anything until I get there." There was a pause before Andy finally spoke again. He said, "Love you, big brother." Then the line went dead. Barry never made that plain. The next call came at dawn, and it was from their mom, and she couldn't even say anything. She could only cry. The official explanation came quickly and without much warmth. Myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle. But that clinical phrasing was no match for the noise outside. The gossip machine, which had been grinding away at Andy for years, went into overdrive. The headlines shouted overdose, saying he'd finally been taken down by the DA that had followed him like a shadow. Some others even suggested that he took his own life. And then there were the wild theories, the fringe stuff, strange conspiracies, darker secrets, even the occasional outlandish claim that didn't deserve repeating. The world wanted a story big enough to match Andy's fame and the drama of his fall, and they weren't going to settle for something as unglamorous as a medical condition. Barry, meanwhile, was destroyed. He couldn't face the circus. For months, he shut himself away in his Miami home, cut off from the world, trying to handle a grief too heavy to carry in public. When he finally stepped back into the light, looking older and worn down from the weight of it all, he didn't give long interviews or sweeping explanations. He gave the press one single sentence: he died of a broken heart. To Barry, it was the most honest way he could put it. To the world, though, it was an open door, an invitation for decades of speculation and rumor. For the Gibb family, it meant living through more than 30 years of painful whispers and conspiracy theories, all piled on top of a loss that had already been unbearable. But after many years, Barry has come out to say more on this matter.
34 years after his death, his story is the subject of a new biography celebrating his life and legacy. And the author of Arrow Through the Heart, Matthew Hill, joins us now from Georgia in the US. Matthew, great to have your insight this morning. What attracted you to the subject of Andy Gibb?
In 2022, Barry finally opened up in a documentary, breaking the silence he had carried for decades. The producer started to ask about Andy, and before the question was even finished, Barry's eyes welled up. For the first time, he talked in painful detail about that final phone call. He admitted to the guilt, the relentless guilt, that had followed him every single day since. Those what-if questions that never stopped playing in his head. What if he'd pushed harder? What if he'd been there sooner? What if he'd just kept Andy close in Miami? He confirmed what the autopsy had shown, that it was myocarditis, a heart condition, but that years of substance use had left Andy's heart too weak to fight it. The medical truth was clear, but Barry insisted on something deeper, something the reports couldn't capture. Andy hadn't just died because of a weakened heart muscle. He died of heartbreak. Barry spoke about Andy's despair over his fading career, his fragile nature, and the way he felt like he was letting everyone down. And then, through tears, he looked straight into the camera and said the words he had been carrying for over 30 years. "We loved Andy every single day of his life. That's the rumor I want buried." And then he shared the final, devastating detail, the gut punch he had kept secret all those years. He revealed that on the very morning Andy died in London, a courier was already on his way to the apartment. That courier was carrying a package from the Bee Gees. Inside was a cassette tape, a demo of a brand new ballad they had just written, a song specifically crafted for Andy's comeback album. A song they believed would resurrect his career and heal his spirit. It was called Arrow Through the Heart. However, the tape arrived the day after the funeral. Barry confessed he has never played it for anyone. In the years since, Barry has made it his mission to reshape how people remember Andy. He doesn't want the story to be about the struggles or the headlines. He wants people to hold on to the light, the grin, the joy. When he talks about Andy now, he works through the pain to find those happier memories. And even though his eyes still get wet, there's often a smile there too, especially when he remembers things like Christmas of 1982. Andy was sober then, living in Miami, and for some reason, he got put in charge of breakfast. He stood at the stove flipping pancakes that he'd carefully shaped into vinyl records, while the four brothers, Barry, Robin, Maurice, and Andy, stood around him absolutely destroying the lyrics to Silent Night in the most off-key four-part harmony you can imagine. It was messy, loud, funny, and perfect. Just pure brotherly love. That's the Andy Barry holds on to, and that's the Andy he wants the world to know. To make sure of it, he's put his money and his heart into preserving his brother's memory. He funds a music scholarship in Andy's name, helping young musicians get their start, and with every award he writes a personal note to the kid. The message is always the same, a piece of wisdom he's earned the hard way. Talent's a matter of luck. Kindness is a matter of choice. Andy chose both. It's Barry's way of making sure his brother is remembered for who he was, not what he battled. And in 2023, he took another step to lock in that legacy. He fought to get Andy his own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a permanent spot among the greats. At the ceremony, with family, fans, and cameras all around, Barry looked down at the shiny new star on the sidewalk and, with a smile full of love and just a hint of mischief, said, "One more light for this sidewalk, and trust me, this kid's still glowing." So, what's your favorite Andy Gibb memory? Let us know in the comments below. And hey, if you're new to our channel and appreciate stories about the music that shaped our lives, take a moment to hit that subscribe button.